Welcome to the Aguilar Conversations, a global perspective. I'm Tony Aguilar. As America continues with its fentanyl crisis, the Trump administration has decided to use tariffs as a weapon to stem the tide of fentanyl entering into the country. But our guest today, Dr. Rodney Coates, suggests that history shows us that efforts to control the supply of illicit drugs from entering into the country have largely failed. So, how can America resolve the fentanyl crisis? That issue is next. My guest today is Dr. Rodney Coates, professor of global and intercultural studies at Miami University in Ohio, where he also leads the Center for the Study and Support of Children and Families of the Incarcerated. Dr. Coates, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, sir, for inviting me.
I wanted to start out because I had read your article about the fentanyl crisis and about the tariffs that are being placed on nations such as Canada and Mexico. But I want to ask
Yes,
the
sir.
question that fentanyl obviously is this synthetic opioid. And part of the original problem with opioids is the fact that too many of them that were being overprescribed. But since 2013, the prescription of opioids has decreased. But
hmm
deaths coming from fentanyl have steadily gone up. So, why is that?
hmm
You, as a sociologist, have been looking at this. Why is that?
We live in a society where Big Pharma advertises every 5, 10 minutes on radio, TV, in the news, so forth and so on about various drugs. We in the United States are hooked on drugs. Okay. Drugs from everything from losing weight to mental health, so forth and so on. So even though the prescriptions have gone down, people had already been hooked on these opioids, and guess what? They're getting substitutions for them on the street. Okay, and who are we talking about? We're talking about not only young people, particularly males, but we're also talking about housewives. We're talking about school kids. We're talking about major portions of our society that are addicted to a whole range of drugs. Okay, fentanyl is killing folks because it is such a potent drug, but those who can't get prescriptions for it are getting opiates, are getting it off the street, so forth and so on. And these are poor residents within our country, both poor whites and poor blacks and middle class students.
Is the addiction to this drug, fentanyl, and from your research, is it because of prescriptions that have been given in the past, or is this something like, for example, what we have with cocaine and heroin and crack? Is it the same, or where it became a drug of choice, but if you're laying out the original issue, people were taking these drugs for a malady, but it turned into an addiction. Is that
Exactly.
okay?
And
So
it's both of these. It's both of these. On the one hand, yes, you have a generation that are addicted to this as a consequence of the pharmaceutical prescription, so forth and so on. Okay. In fact, pharmacies such as Kroger, Walmart, and other places have been sued for getting people addicted to opiates. And these individuals, by the way, many of these are housewives, many of these individuals wound up going to these secondary markets to get this. Okay. Now, as a street drug, that's a whole different issue. Okay. All right. And yes, that is being pushed in many of our communities, even on college campuses. All right. By drug dealers. Okay. Why? It is a potent, very addictive drug. So as a consequence, as many drug use is going down, this one is actually going up in this country, along with the deaths associated with that.
in your article that you wrote for the conversation, why Trump's tariffs can't solve America's fentanyl crisis,
Mhm.
you say that you are concerned about two aspects. One, whether or not the tariffs will do more harm than good, and the fact that we have gone down this route before in terms of trying to get to the supply as opposed to the demand. How do you think tariffs may worsen the situation? And two, why is it that you think the United States has never really focused on the demand side? I mean, they have a little bit,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
on the whole, there has not been a real focus on the demand side. Why is that?
Okay, let me deal with your first question about why tariffs will not work. Okay. First of all, here's an interesting fact. Approximately 20% of the fentanyl that's coming into this country is being brought by so-called undocumented or immigrants. Okay. Guess who's bringing the other 80% into this country? U.S. citizens. Okay. So guess what the tariffs are not going to do, or the border guard, so forth and so on. Okay. That's not going to impact upon that. Okay. All right. By the way, let's say we're going to punish China, or we're going to punish Mexico, or we're going to punish Canada. Okay. If China were to suddenly stop producing the precursor drugs used to manufacture this, guess what? You have a whole bunch of other countries that will step up to do this very same thing. Okay. All right. The other thing is that our history of dealing with drugs, all right, this goes all the way back to tobacco, cocaine, marijuana, you name the alcohol.
Alcohol,
None of
sure.
those have been successful. Okay. In fact, in three cases, tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana, guess what? We have now subsequently legalized all of those. Why? Because we came to the conclusion we could not prohibit people from doing it. And guess what? We still have a tobacco addiction problem in this country. We still have an alcohol addiction problem in this country. Okay. And yes, we are increasingly seeing a marijuana addiction in this country, but states are making billions of dollars in tax revenues from tobacco sales, from alcohol sales, and yes, from now marijuana sales. Okay. Here's the issue. We have an addiction problem. That is a medical problem. That is not a criminal problem. Many of the countries around the world are not criminalizing individuals because they have addiction problems. They recognize this is a medical issue. You need psychological help and counseling. Okay? That works. All right?
Nations
That
like
works.
nations like France and Sweden, as you said, have treated it as a medical problem.
Hello. Yes, sir.
So
And
what pre-
England,
so
okay?
what prevents us from doing that?
Our politics right now, okay? By the way, if we were to invest in treatment programs, the money that we're currently investing in interdiction, in trying to stop it, so forth and so on, guess what? We have the money in the system. Okay. And while we're in this moment of where we're trying to become more efficient with our dollars, all right. I'm willing to suggest that every dollar that we spend in toward medical treatment will reduce our budgets by a factor of 10. Right now, for every $10 we're spending in terms of interdiction and criminalization, so forth and so on. By the way, it costs $60,000 to lock somebody up in jail across the country in medium security prisons. Okay, that's $60,000 a year. And the average sentence, 3 to 5 years. Guess what? It would cost $1,000 per. All right, in medical treatment if we had medical treatment facilities. We can go from 60,000 to 1,000. Oh, by the way, this individual would not lose their jobs. They would not be away from their families. Oh, and they will keep on paying taxes. So we will actually get a return on our investment. We get no such return from the criminalization of individuals who have an addiction problem.
Now, picking up on your comment, it's about the politics. So I'm quite sure that a number of politicals on perhaps either side of the aisle know these statistics and they know the
Hmm.
history of going against marijuana, going against alcohol
Hmm.
and tobacco
Hmm.
and the like.
Hmm.
So the question, when you say the politics, what do you mean by that? Are we caught up as a nation in this sense of morality?
Hmm.
So we look to punish people who do that, even though under present administration, morality can't really be a word that's used to describe this administration. But what is it that's driving these politicians to continuously look at this thing
What's
as a criminal
interesting,
way instead of
right?
as a sickness?
What's interesting is that if we look at opiate addiction and other addictions among middle class and upper class individuals, we are very tolerant of that. We excuse that. Okay. We accept that as a medical problem. Okay. But when it's poor whites and poor blacks, we want to punish them for the same behavior that some of our elite individuals, some holding office even as we speak, some in the cabinet, so forth and so on, some with health and human services, okay, has acknowledged the fact that he has a history of drug addiction and abuse. Okay. All right. Notice he got help. What about our poor people? Okay. All right. That's what this is about. Okay.
You raise
And by the way, we failed. Go ahead.
no, I'm saying you raise an interesting question because you also deal with critical race theory and intersectionality. And you're
Yes, sir.
talking about it really as a matter of class at this stage, where
Hmm.
if this becomes overwhelmingly a problem for the upper classes, we'd be looking at this a lot differently.
Yes,
So, my question to you
totally
is
differently.
so, how would you go about creating a different narrative around the fentanyl crisis?
Hmm. Here's the interesting thing. We tend to be in this country rather slow to reform. Okay. I mean, look how long we waited to deal with alcohol. Look how many years we have been trying to control marijuana. Okay. So this is just part of a series of we've been at this stage before. Okay. And eventually sanity will prevail. And by the way, how does that prevail? By helping to inform the average citizen that your tax dollars are being spent right now misguidedly. Okay. All right. And rather than punishing these individuals, you can save money in your tax dollars. We can use this current moment of how do we reform government and government spending. Okay. This would save us billions of dollars a year across the federal and state and local governments. Okay. Why? Because it's much more effective and efficient to treat somebody than to incarcerate them. And by the way, that would release our police to go after the drug dealers, okay, in our communities, okay.
I want to bring up another point. I want to go back to something you had
Yes, sir.
said about who's actually bringing fentanyl to the
Hmm.
country.
Hmm.
And I believe there was a report that said of about 2,900 convictions that were made of people who were bringing fentanyl into the country along the southwest border. 2,100 were American citizens, as you just
Yes,
pointed
sir.
out. But yet
Yes,
we
sir.
have pointed to Canada, we have pointed to Mexico and all of that. So
Hmm.
what's behind that? I'm not suggesting that Mexico is not a source of the problem. Canada
Hmm.
clearly is not. I mean, it's like 0.2%
Hmm.
in terms of fentanyl that comes into the country from through the northern border. But what's driving that? And also, obviously, with China, what's driving that as opposed to the narrative that you know is the correct one? And so, how do we get out of that narrative? Because it seems to me, if we keep making these narratives and keep acting on these narratives, number one, we're wasting money, as you've just said. But number two, we're not going to resolve the problem.
Right. What's interesting is that you have senior citizens going into Mexico every day to get drugs that are much cheaper and easily available in pharmacists in Mexico. Some of these grandmothers are also being encouraged by drug dealers to pick up some fentanyl. All right. Why grandmothers? And by the way, there's several of these stories that you can identify. Why grandmothers? Why people tourists going there? Because again, our narrative is that this is immigrants and undocumented immigrants and drug cartels that are bringing these within this country. That's who we are targeting. Okay, and guess what? It is these other individuals that are doing this, and as you notice, 2,100 out of 2,900, less than right at 20% of the interdictions are Mexican and other individuals. Okay, all right, that's an issue. And again, why are these individuals not being targeted? Because again, we don't assume that a little old lady, white lady, middle class, is smuggling drugs while the grandmothers and grandfathers are going to get there. Okay. Okay. And this raises a whole bunch of other issues about access to drugs, access to medical care. The pharmaceuticals are so expensive in this country that our elderly are crossing the border, Mexican border, to get cheap resources, to get cheap drugs. Okay. All right. And this just adds, and why are they doing this? Because they're on limited income. Okay. All right. And by the way, this is how they can bring a little bit more money into their situation. So that raises another issue about poverty among our senior citizens.
Now, there have been attempts, and the attempts that are being made are really what I would call after the effect attempts. So a person is now suffering from an overdose, we give them Nexaline.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the big thing that's out there, is being pushed out there. But it does seem to me that that's kind of it's not exactly. I don't want to disparage the notion of Nexaline. That is an important part of this.
Good. Yeah.
But it seems to me that if we were to put as much effort into what you're suggesting,
Hmm.
then the need of Nexaline would be quite less, quite
What's
frankly.
yeah, what's interesting is that yeah, we're making needles available, we're making these emergency services available, so forth and so on. Again, that's almost like after the fact. We're waiting for a crisis to surface. It is cheaper to deal with a problem before it becomes an emergency than to wait until it becomes an emergency. Okay. All right. And again, this is about efficiency. This is about treating and helping people. Okay. All right. Part of this would be alleviated if we had universal health care available too, that included drug treatment and therapy for our poor residents in this country. Okay. That would alleviate it right there. And it would be cheaper to provide this universal health care for all of our citizens, our poor, our working class, so forth and so on. Then again, our current efforts to control the problem as opposed to treat the problem.
So, how then do you begin to build a coalition
Mm-hmm.
that begins to look at the issue the way you're looking at it?
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously it has to be resolved within the political circles.
Yes.
And given today's politics, a lot of that is quite frankly hard to do. However, fentanyl is a problem in many, many communities
Yes.
that people have an emotional reaction to because they know someone that might have been affected by fentanyl, or they know someone that knows someone. So either way, they're affected one way or the other. How do you begin to build a coalition of folks that's multiracial, multi-ethnic, and come from both sides of the political aisle to
Mm-hmm.
begin talking about this to the political persons who need to hear this?
I'm looking right now at a recent study
Mm.
that identifies the states that have had the highest number of overdoses. California
Mhm.
at 7,000 of the 81,000. Florida at 5,500 of the 8,000, 81,000. Illinois, Indiana, 2,000. Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, okay, oh, and New Jersey, and New York, and North Carolina, okay. This would start in each of these states, recognizing you've got a serious problem here, okay. By the way, we're right. We have been talking about what's happening at the federal level. Okay, I believe that all politics starts locally. Okay, so we would start at the local level in these states, and first of all, pointing out to these politicians that many of these, by the way, are red states. Okay, we would point out to these politicians. Guess what? These state governors. Guess what? You've got thousands of people that are dying. Of those that are dying, that's only those that have reached this crisis level. Guess what? There's another 5 to 10 people for each one that has died that's addicted to these drugs. Okay. All right. This is just, these are those that have reached and crossed that crisis level. Okay. We have, and that does not count those that you have put in jail. These are those that are still walking around, suffering, so forth and so on, waiting essentially to die. Okay. All right. It means helping these states and these and by the way, the constituents in these states, many of which are Republican voters. If you really want to save money, let's do the math. Okay. How much are you spending right now? By the way, that's using this current moment and conversation that's taking place nationally. How do we save money? How do we save your tax dollars? Okay. It is more efficient to treat these individuals than to criminalize them. Okay. And until the voters recognize that, the politicians are not going to recognize that. And by the way, why should they? Because we're talking about those people. We're talking about the poor. In many cases, the presumption is we're talking about people of color. Okay. All right. It's not until their sons and daughters gets hooked. Oh, we got a problem now.
That's one of the things I wanted to ask you because I do remember when we had the heroin crisis out of the 70s, and obviously it was in the
Mhm.
60s as well.
Yeah.
But a lot of the reaction to it was the just say no. But here there seems to be, even though that they're looking at it from the wrong side, they're looking at it from the supply side, still it was taken more
Mm-hmm.
seriously. So Nixon had his war on
Mm-hmm.
drugs. It seems because of the
Mm-hmm.
perception of where the problem is, that it is done a little differently.
Yes,
So we will treat this as a criminalization
that's
problem.
right.
So, and so my
Yes.
skepticism is how do you move away from that? Because that's just a part of the American culture that, the people who we think
Again,
are
yeah.
responsible for this and who are the victims of this, we didn't value anyway. It seems as though the tariffs were added, the fentanyl was added to it as another reason to do the tariffs, because that's not the reason that the tariffs were first announced or announced during the campaign. So it just seems as though it
Uh,
was added to the tariffs to give another reason for justification. Would that be
right.
correct?
Uh, oh, you would be absolutely correct. By the way, we are targeting China. We are targeting Mexico. And yes, we are targeting Canada.
Mhm.
This becomes an excuse for that targeting.
Right.
Okay. All right. And what are we really concerned about with? Okay. Again, these are economics, okay, about you're doing some things that we don't like. You are producing goods and services. You are a competitor with us in steel production, in microchips, in scarce minerals and such. Talking about China that we need for our chips. Okay. Oh, by the way, we moved a lot of our manufacturing into Mexico in a previous generation. Why did we do that? Because many American corporations realized that they could avoid U.S. Sanctions on pollution and also cheaper labor, okay, going into Mexico, okay. Oh, we had announced that we somebody who's president of the United States announced that we're going to annex Canada and make them the 51st or 52nd country state in the Union. Oh, by the way, we're targeting Mexico as the what am I talking about? The Gulf of America, okay, so forth and so on, okay. We have been punishing China since the first Trump administration. We talked about the China virus. We look at, by the way, this goes all the way back 100 years where Chinese exclusionary acts, okay? And we have been targeting these colored people in Mexico since, this goes all the way back to the Alamo, okay? In this country over 100 years ago, this war, so forth and so on. So again, we have a long history of doing this. And again, you go back to Reagan and Nixon and the war on drugs. That's when we created the cradle to prison pipeline. Okay, that did what? Okay, we took funding out of schools targeting people of color, and we did, and they started getting kicked out at higher rates, and we started arresting them at higher rates. Okay, versus education, training, all right, and also drug treatment. Okay, when we have been for 40 years sending these individuals to jail. Okay, mainly because they're people of color. Now, by the way, the phrase you're looking for is white replacement theory. Okay, what is that? This is where the political climate is. Oh, you know what? We're running out of white folks. Okay, so we need to stop these brown people from coming into this country. We need to stop these Asians from coming into this country. Oh, and we need to penalize the black folks in this country. Why? Oh, abortion. We got rid of abortion because we need more white women to have more white babies. Okay. What is the trauma about? Why are we punishing these people of color? Why are we targeting the immigrants? Okay. Particularly from China, particularly from India, particularly from Mexico, because of the presumption that they're taking away these jobs. Okay. That's what this is all about. And you know what's strange? They're not taking away the jobs. They're doing
But
jobs that many European Americans do not want to do.
in the moment we have left, how hopeful are you that we can get a hold of this fentanyl crisis through the present system, but also working locally, as you just said, but also utilizing our institutions of higher learning, high schools, and the like? How hopeful are you?
I am hopeful. You keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. That is by definition insanity.
Mhm.
Okay. And ultimately, our thick-headed Americans will ultimately get the picture. Okay. Why? Because ultimately we're always having this shift in political and in voter sentiments. Okay. All right. As what? As scholars consistently raise the bar and engage in these conversations. That's what we do. Okay. That's also why you're seeing all the attacks on higher education in this country, because we are challenging the rhetoric of this current moment, and historically so.
My guest today has been Dr. Rodney Coates, professor of global and intercultural studies at Miami University in Ohio. Dr. Coates, it's been a pleasure to have you as my guest today.
My honor, sir.
And thank you for joining us. And join us again next week as we have another issue of global and national importance here on the Aguilar Conversations, a global perspective.